Welcome to Rewriting the Past, the history podcast with a difference. We examine a major historical event and then we ask ourselves the question, what if it never happened? In this alternative history series, we look at how history could have been very different. I'm Chris, your host, and let's embark on our next alternative event. The Berlin Wall was a physical and ideological barrier that divided East and West Berlin during the Cold War. Here's a brief history. After World War II, Germany was divided into 4 occupation zones controlled by the Allied powers: the United States, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and France. The capital city, Berlin, located in the Soviet zone, was also divided amongst the Allies. As ideological and political differences between the Western powers and the Soviet Union deepened, tensions escalated. In 1949, the German Democratic Republic, East Germany, was established as a separate socialist state under Soviet influence. However, many East Germans sought to escape to West Germany, which had a more prosperous economy and political freedoms. To stop the mass exodus, the East German government, with Soviet approval, started constructing a barrier in 1961. On August 13, 1961, East German authorities began building a barbed wire and concrete barrier that physically separated East and West Berlin. Over time, this makeshift barrier evolved into a more sophisticated structure, including guard towers, anti-vehicle trenches, and ultimately a concrete wall. The Berlin Wall became a stark symbol of the Iron Curtain dividing the communist East and the capitalist West. Numerous escape attempts were made, with some individuals successfully crossing the border, often through daring and creative means. However, many others lost their lives in these attempts, as border guards were ordered to shoot anyone trying to escape. As the Soviet Union underwent significant political changes under Mikhail Gorbachev, a more relaxed atmosphere permeated Eastern Europe. On November 9, 1989, an East German government official mistakenly announced that citizens could cross into West Berlin. The announcements led to a surge of people gathering at the border crossings, and the overwhelmed guards eventually allowed them to pass. The Soviet Union did not want to remove the wall, except slowly. They were not prepared for the suddenness of the event, but can only stand by and let it happen. This event marked the beginning of the end of the Berlin Wall. With the fall of the Berlin Wall, East and West Germany began the process of reunification. On October 3, 1990, Germany was officially reunified, and the dismantling of the Berlin Wall began. The physical barrier that had symbolized the division of the city and the ideological standoff between East and West was gradually torn down. But what if the Berlin Wall was never taken down? What if the Russian leadership decided instead to maintain the barrier? In our alternative history, we explore the ramifications for the German people, both East and West, and how the geopolitics will be affected. We'll trace the eventual trajectory of this event, and we'll explore what the future could have looked like. In many ways, the fall of the Berlin Wall precipitated the fall of the Soviet Union itself and the end of the Cold War. Without the fall of the wall, it is likely that the Cold War would never have ended either. Without the fall of the Berlin Wall, East and West Germany would remain physically and ideologically divided. The tension between the communist Eastern Bloc, led by the Soviet Union, and the capitalist Western Bloc, dominated by the United States, would persist. The divided Berlin would continue to symbolize the enduring Cold War struggle. The Soviet Union would maintain a sphere of influence over various Eastern European countries. Without its dissolution, these satellite states would likely remain under Soviet dominance, limiting their political autonomy and economic development. Countries like Ukraine, Estonia, and Lithuania, for example, would never gain independence for a while. In all, the 15 countries that were left as independent countries after the Soviet Union fell would never have come into being just yet. The maintenance of the Berlin Wall might lead to a prolonged period of stability through a sort of Cold War stalemate. Both sides would avoid direct military confrontation, focusing instead on maintaining their respective spheres of influence. The divided Germany could become a neutral buffer zone, preventing a direct clash between NATO and the Warsaw Pact. The arms race, a defining feature of the Cold War, would probably escalate further. Both superpowers might continue to invest heavily in military technologies, leading to increased tensions and risk of direct confrontation. Other countries like China and India would rise much faster and become superpowers themselves, economically rivaling the US. The economic disparities between East and West Germany would likely widen over time. While West Germany thrived economically, East Germany would struggle under the socialist system. The technological gap would also become more pronounced, with the West making significant advancements while the East lags behind. We can see evidence of this on the Korean Peninsula in our actual history. The DMZ that divides these two countries is similar to what the Berlin Wall would come to be, a heavily militarized divider between what used to be one country. The absence of a resolution in Germany might lead to increased proxy conflicts in other parts of the world. The superpowers would continue to vie for influence in regions like Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and Africa, using local conflicts to assert their dominance without directly confronting each other. Spycraft, subterfuge, and later cyber warfare would escalate immensely. Some examples of these proxy wars could be in Afghanistan. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 was a significant Cold War proxy conflict. If the Cold War had persisted, the United States might have continued to support Afghan resistance fighters, including the Mujahideen, against the Soviet-backed government in Kabul. Another example is Central America. The United States and the Soviet Union were involved in proxy conflicts in Central America during the Cold War. The Sandinista government in Nicaragua, supported by the Soviet Union, faced opposition from US-backed Contras. This conflict might have escalated further or taken different forms if the Cold War had continued. The Angolan Civil War saw US supporting anti-communist forces while the Soviet Union and Cuba supported the Marxist MPLA government. The conflict might have persisted or intensified with continued superpower involvement. The Middle East was a hotspot for Cold War proxy conflicts, and these tensions might have continued. Proxy conflicts in Lebanon, Iraq, or other regional flashpoints could have seen increased superpower involvement. While the Vietnam War officially ended in 1975, continued tensions in Southeast Asia may have led to other proxy conflicts. The potential for communist insurgencies, particularly in countries like Thailand or Malaysia, could have drawn US and Soviet support. The Ethiopian Civil War involved both Soviet and US support for different factions. With the Cold War persisting, this conflict may have continued to be a proxy battleground. Another example is the Korean Peninsula. The Korean War ended in 1953 with an armistice, not a peace treaty. The unresolved conflict could have seen renewed tensions and proxy conflicts, especially if the superpowers continued to back opposing sides. The apartheid regime in South Africa faced resistance from Soviet support movements like the African National Congress, the ANC. Proxy conflicts in countries such as Namibia and Mozambique might have continued or even intensified. The breakup of Yugoslavia in the 1990s resulted in various conflicts. If the Cold War had persisted, superpower involvement may have taken different forms in the Balkans, with potential backing for different factions. With the Soviet Union maintaining control over Central Asian republics, potential conflicts or incidents in the region might have drawn in US support for opposing factions seeking independence. East Germany, facing economic challenges and a growing discontented population, might resort to authoritarian measures to maintain control. The government would likely tighten its grip on dissent, leading to social unrest and possibly even uprisings. Facing internal dissent and potential challenges to its authority, the Soviet government might have resorted to increased repression. The KGB, the Committee for State Security, and the Stasi, the East German secret police, and other security forces would have intensified their efforts to quell dissent, leading to political arrests, censorship, and the suppression of opposition movements. The state-controlled media would have propagated anti-Western sentiments to justify authoritarian measures and maintain unity. The international community might react differently to these events, as the absence of the fall of the Berlin Wall would reshape the dynamics of global diplomacy. The latter half of the 20th century might witness a stagnation in global progress. The absence of the transformative events that followed the fall of the Berlin Wall, such as the reunification of Germany and the collapse of the Soviet Union, would alter the trajectory of historical developments. Some examples of this could be cultural isolation, in which the divided world might have led to cultural isolation, restricted travel, and limited cultural exchange between East and West could have resulted in a lack of appreciation for the diversity and the richness of different societies. Global institutions such as the United Nations may have struggled to fulfill their intended roles. The deep-seated ideological divisions could have hindered effective international cooperation in addressing conflicts, humanitarian crisis, and other global challenges. The space race might not have progressed as rapidly or with the same spirit of competition. The absence of collaborative efforts in space exploration could have slowed down technological advancements related to space travel and research. The Cold War era saw both superpowers supporting authoritarian regimes around the world, often overlooking human rights abuses in the interest of maintaining political alliances. With the continuation of the Cold War, there might have been a lack of progress in promoting human rights globally. The ideological struggle between communism and capitalism could have led to limited social progress. Issues related to gender equality, LGBTQ rights, and other social justice causes might have faced resistance or neglect in a world dominated by Cold War divisions. The persistent ideological divide might have hindered global cooperation on environmental issues. Efforts to address climate change, pollution, and other environmental challenges could have been stymied by the lack of collaboration between the superpowers. It is likely that in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, there would be a rise of nationalism. As economic conditions worsen in East Germany and other Eastern European countries, nationalist sentiments rise. People in the East increasingly resent the perceived prosperity in the West and desire more autonomy. Nationalist movements might have emerged as resistance against Soviet influence in Eastern European countries. Populations in countries such as Poland, Ukraine, and others could have rallied around national identity as a means of asserting independence and autonomy. Calls for the removal of Soviet troops, withdrawal from military alliances, and the establishment of fully sovereign states would have gained momentum. Efforts to revive and promote national culture, language, and history could have been central to nationalist movements. Embracing and celebrating cultural heritage would have been a way for East Germany and Eastern European nations to distinguish themselves from Soviet influence. The Soviet Union, already facing internal pressures, would experience further strain as it attempts to maintain control over its Eastern European allies. The lack of reforms and the resistance to change exacerbate the economic decline and the internal dissent within the Soviet Union. Republics, particularly those in the Baltic states and Eastern Europe, could declare independence. The dissolution might be chaotic and marked by internal strife, as various regions seek to chart their own course. The Soviet Union, facing insurmountable challenges, would probably formally dissolve. East Germany would now be a newly independent country. There would be no unification plans in the interim. Too much time has passed for the easy transition for either West or East Germany. The financial and legal implications of reunifying both countries are a deterrent for most global powers. The future brings about significant changes in the global landscape. Economic pressures coupled with technological advancements leads to shift in alliances. The Eastern Bloc, including East Germany, recognizing the need to modernize, opens up to limited economic reforms. However, the ideological divide remains entrenched, and the Berlin Wall continues to stand as a stark reminder of the ongoing Cold War. Technological advancements, particularly in communication and information systems, play a crucial role in shaping public opinion. The citizens of both East and West Germany, as well as other Eastern European nations, become increasingly connected through a digital realm, fostering a shared cultural exchange despite the political divide. The future of the world will probably witness a historic moment as both Eastern and Western leaders come together to announce the gradual dismantling of the Berlin Wall. The decision is driven by a combination of factors, including environmental concerns, economic interdependence, and a shared desire for a more stable and cooperative world order. The deconstruction of the Berlin Wall becomes a symbolic event, signaling the end of the prolonged Cold War and the beginning of a new era of collaboration. Germany is reunified, and the international community cautiously embraces a future where former adversaries must learn to coexist in a rapidly changing world. We hope you've enjoyed our alternative history. The fall of the Berlin Wall itself was a pivotal moment that significantly shaped the world we live in today, and the absence of that event would lead to a fundamentally different course of history. However, it's important to remember that any counterfactual exploration is, of course, purely speculative. We do try in our research to adhere to what we see as a natural trajectory before the event takes place in order to give a reasoned and balanced viewpoint.